Good afternoon, everyone. Today is February 22nd, 2022. Welcome to the bill hearings of the Ways and Means Committee. The first bill hearing that we have is House Bill 939, and we will welcome Delegate Shoemaker to his former committee. And whenever you're ready, Delegate Shoemaker, you can begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to be back with Ways and Means, a very august committee. And I'm here to present on HB 939. Essentially what this bill does, and as you all know, I'm a pretty simple fella, and this is a pretty simple bill. So this would prohibit state boards of election, local boards of elections, or municipalities from mailing an absentee ballot to any voter who's not requested an absentee ballot. We know firsthand that as a consequence of what we went through during the pandemic, during election year of 2020, that ballots were mailed to folks where voters hadn't lived for years. We heard anecdotal testimony about that on this committee. Ballots have been mailed to deceased folks. Nowadays, it is easier than ever to request an absentee ballot. So the premise, as I alluded to in my written testimony, which you have in your packets, the premise behind mass mailing of unrequested ballots certainly isn't necessary. We heard a lot of floor debate last year, or perhaps the year before, they all run together, about ballot harvesting. This is kind of like, mailing unsolicited absentee ballots to voters is kind of like, from my perspective at least, voter harvesting or ballot harvesting in reverse. So I don't think it's necessary that boards of election engage in that practice, hence the bill. And that's my testimony, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? And I just want to remind the committee that we have Jared Demarinis with us and Mary Wagner from the State Board of Elections, should you have any questions for either one of them as well. And Delegate Shoemaker, I think they're taking it easy on you.
I appreciate that too. I love those folks. I missed you all very much.
Thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 939.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, calling House Bill 842. And this is a Calvert County bill that I believe Delegate Fisher will be presenting. Hello, Delegate Fisher.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman. Congratulations on was that an advancement from coming from judiciary? Is that how that works?
Well, they didn't, my pay wasn't increased, so I'm not sure.
I'm
pretty sure Delegate Griffith would say it's an advancement because he's not here until the wee hours of the morning.
Well, thank you for having me here on behalf of House Bill 842. For the record, my name is Mark Fisher, representing Calvert County, and the bill is Calvert County Hotel Rental Tax Distribution of Revenue. The bill establishes a tourism development incentive fund in Calvert County and requires revenue from the county's hotel rental tax to be distributed into that fund, and takes effect in July of this year. That's all the bill does.
Okay, are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 842. Calling House Bill 846, which is Delegate Fisher's again, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This is House Bill 846. For the record, Delegate Mark Fisher for Calvert County personal property tax exemption. This is not a delegation bill. This bill is put in on behalf of myself and Delegate Clark. It exempts specified personal property in Calvert County from taxation. Beginning June 1, effectively what this bill does, it says that if you have a business in Calvert County, you do not have to pay the business personal property tax to Calvert County, with the exception of the following businesses that would still have to pay. So here's who has to continue to pay: railroads, utilities, fiber optic and cable companies, cell phone towers and cell phone tower owners, and the wireless appurtenances that go on those cell towers, electronic bingo machines, everything else in Calvert County that relates to businesses, small, medium, and large, their personal property would not have to be taxed. There are a couple of payment in lieu of taxation bills that are in place in Calvert with Dominion and with the nuclear power plant. And those, of course, would have to continue to pay taxes based on the pilot, but everyone else would not. And that is the bill.
See, Delegate Barnes has a question.
Yeah, I think I wanted to ask him a question because I remember when I came over to ECM, we gave me a hard time on my trying to just supplement water for milk bill. But no, seriously, Mark, Delegate Fisher, I know you said that this is not a local bill, but has the Calvert County government weighed in at all on this bill?
Fair enough. Yeah. So this is a bill, just, you're correct, of just Delegate Clark and I. So the county does not support the elimination of the tax as described in the bill. The delegation does, but the county does not. You were correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Delegate Fisher. That concludes the
Thank you.
testimony
Appreciate
on
it.
House Bill 846. Moving on to House Bill 721, Delegate Hornberger, whenever you're ready. Is Delegate Hornberger here?
I just called him.
Okay, well, we are going to just pass over that. Do we have Delegate Metzger? Okay, let's just take a pause here and see who we have. Do we have Hornberger, Metzger, or Kipke?
They just don't get the alacrity of Ways and Means, Madam Chair.
Delegate Kipke is here.
Okay, let me pull that. Thank you, Haley. Okay, calling House Bill 809, Delegate Kipke, hello. And you have one witness, so who will have 2 minutes. So whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of committee. It's wonderful to be with you today. I have House Bill 809. We currently have in Maryland law a property tax exemption for disabled veterans, active duty, and surviving spouses. My father-in-law happens to be one of them, and he was a prisoner of war for 5.5 years, endured incredible torture and starvation, and I could go on. And the state of Maryland, through the legislature, has wisely approved a property tax exemption for individuals like him. He's up in age, and he would have never applied for his property tax exemption if it weren't for the urging of his loved ones. This bill would streamline the application process. It would be done with the assistance of individuals when you buy your house, whether it's the company you're using for your mortgage or whether it's with real estate agents. It will help put a few more hands of assistance there for our veterans that we're honoring with this tax exemption. What the bill specifically does is it allows an individual to submit an application to SDAT for a specified property tax exemption for the exemption that already exists for their home that they're purchasing. By doing this, it will, one, for some veterans, allow them to have greater borrowing capacity because they will no longer have that income tax, that property tax counted against them as part of what they can borrow. It will also currently the way the system works is the money goes into escrow. And then once you're approved, you get that money back. So for, especially, younger veterans or veterans with limited income, that's sort of a hardship that could be avoided. So the bill is very simple in that it just streamlines the process. I believe it also will help veterans who may not have the wherewithal to apply for this on their own. It gives them some additional assistance with that. And it also requires SSTAT to get their approval denial done within a reasonable amount of time so that the process is not delayed. So for all of those reasons, I encourage the committee to support the bill with a favorable vote, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, Brendan McKay, please, for 2 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair and committee members for your time and attention. And thank you, Delegate Kipke, for sponsoring the bill. My name is Brendan McKay. I'm the broker owner of McKay Mortgage Company and a member of the Maryland Mortgage Bankers and Brokers Association, who I'm representing today. And Delegate Kipke really laid a lot of it out. The real crux of this is that it changes the timing. Currently, veterans cannot apply for their exemption until after they own the home, which makes sense on the surface. The problem that it creates is exactly what he was alluding to. It means that mortgage underwriters have to count property taxes against these veteran borrowers when qualifying. And to make that a little more tangible for you, a $500 a month tax bill works out to about $112,000 in home buying power that they would be able to get if these taxes weren't being counted against them. And by allowing them to apply once they're under contract and get evidence of this exemption and this specific exemption on this property before closing, it means the underwriters won't have to count those taxes against them. And this using the same model of a $500 a month taxes, if a disabled veteran currently closed on a home in Maryland in August, $5,500 in tax escrows and tax bills would have to be collected, and that's a loss of liquidity that's happening when they're moving homes, right? They have moving expenses, they have closing costs, they're furnishing a new home, like it's an expensive time in their life. So this bill just changes the timing of it without adding any additional cost to the state or any undue logistical burden, as you'll see from the finance report that came out this morning. So it's just completely upside from our perspective, and we'll do a lot to help a lot of veterans who have sacrificed, as much as anybody for this country. So that's the way that we see it, and I really appreciate your time. We're proud to be supporting this bill, and thank you again to the chair and the committee members.
Questions for Delegate Kipke or the witness? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 809. Moving on to House Bill 738, Delegate Metzger. Welcome.
Good afternoon. House Bill 738, property tax credit for longtime residents to offset the property tax increase February 22nd, 2022, and it's almost 2/22/22. So first, let me say that it is so good to be back amongst friends. I enjoyed my time on this committee many, many times. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. For the record, I'm Delegate Rick Metzger from District 6, and this bill is simply it's a bill that was passed in Baltimore County last year, and so we felt we'd take it through the state. This bill would authorize the mayor and city council, Baltimore City, or the governing body of a county or municipality or corporation to grant by law a certain property tax credit against the county. What it does is if a house or dwelling is owned by an individual who is at least 60 years old, has resided in the dwelling for 30 consecutive years, and has a combined income not to exceed $75,000, applying the act to all taxable years. In short, what this bill will do is keep the tax rate at the current level and will never increase. The amount of property tax that the residents pay would stay at the same as long as they're in there. And this bill, by the way, kind of coincides with my House bill years ago, Welcome Home, Stay Home. This bill would entice residents to stay in Maryland. And I respectfully ask for a favorable report on House Bill 738. And I thank you so kindly for your time and consideration. And you all still smile real good.
Thank you. I see Delegate Barnes has a question.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you, Delegate Messer. We still got your seat over here whenever you want to come back. Real quick, so has the delegation weighed in on this bill?
Baltimore County has passed this bill last year. And in fact, I met with county executive the other day, and they're probably going to implement it in the budget this year because and for the opportunity to let you know, it really doesn't, to make it sensible, it doesn't apply to that many people. You would be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, how many of our seniors make well over $75,000. Many make six figures. So it would help a small group of people that are really financial stuck, so to speak, but it keeps the tax rate from going up and therefore keeps the residents staying here.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions for Delegate Metzger? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 738. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you. Have a marvelous day.
Calling House Bill 721, Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and sorry about those connection difficulties earlier, but I'm in now. So for the record, Delegate Kevin Hornberger here on political clubs. Some of you who are veterans to the committee would have recognized this bill from last year. We actually put this in as a transparency measure. As we all know, we're opposed to dark money infiltrating our electoral system in the form of donations. And something that we noticed in our county was that there was a club making donations, and the money that was generated from the club, when it was given to a particular candidate, the only thing that it had mentioned was the name of the club. It did not mention who made those donations to the club. And the club was basically being used as a front to put money through anonymously. This was originally set up to allow for political clubs, which we all love and are participatory in. However, it can be abused. So the legislation that we have before you today seeks to, if a certain dollar threshold is reached, that it would kick in the reporting requirement. As you know, if you're a candidate, let's say for a central committee or for school board, and you don't plan to fundraise, you can sign an affidavit and say, I won't raise above a certain amount. Well, we just want to parrot that language over to clubs as well. We don't want to stymie clubs. We don't want to prevent clubs from existing or have additional paperwork, but we don't want them to be abused in such a way where donations can be made above and beyond aggregate levels, or in such a way to mask said bad actor donors. So with that, we have a number of advocates that are going to testify on this good government bill, and we hope that the committee would move favorable. And I'd love to take any questions.
Well, you're the only one signed up to testify.
Oh, I think we have some written testimony as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Are there any questions for Delegate Hornberger? Okay, seeing, Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Hornberger, for the legislation. Could you give some examples of like what these political clubs would be? I'm just trying to figure out exactly like, is that like young Democrats, young Republicans, like entities like that, or is there other examples I should be thinking about? Yeah, so the lion's share of these clubs are going to be your political affiliation clubs, Republican club, Democrat club. And, those clubs existed for many years, all throughout our state on both sides of the aisle, and even libertarian, independent, et cetera. However, there is a way for those clubs to make political donations to actual candidates. And that is the thing that we are seeking to monitor and have them report to the state. If they're not making donations, if it's a pure club, social, what have you, influence, et cetera, they're not party to this bill. When they cross that threshold and start making large donations to candidates, that's when the reporting requirement would kick in. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
More questions for Delegate Hornberger? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 721. Calling House Bill 815, Delegate Parrott, and there's one individual signed up to testify after Delegate Parrott. So Delegate Parrott, when you're ready. I know he's in here, or he was in here. Okay, Sarah or Haley, it looks like he might not be in here anymore. I know he was. So we will pass this over for now.
He was in here, but he disappeared.
Hold on to that for now. Okay, calling House Bill 860.
I heard
Thank
the first
you.
two numbers. Is that my bill you've called? 867?
I was on mute, so I don't know how I muted myself. Okay, House Bill 862, Delegate Feldmark.
Not me.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you and good afternoon. For the record, I'm Delegate Jessica Feldmark, here to present House Bill 862. This legislation would continue the practice that was adopted on an emergency basis for the 2020 election and would help ensure that all voters have a voice in our election. If the same voter submits 2 mail-in ballots, one ballot is counted and the other is rejected. However, if a voter submits a mail-in ballot and a provisional ballot, current law requires that both ballots be rejected, meaning the voter, who most likely was just trying to make sure their vote got counted, ends up losing their voice in that election. House Bill 862 would correct this unfortunate provision by specifying that the mail-in ballot should be counted and the provisional ballot should be rejected, unless, of course, the mail-in ballot is received after the provisional ballot has already been canvassed. As I mentioned, this practice was approved under the emergency regulations for the 2020 general election, and it worked well, but of course, those emergency regulations have since expired. House Bill 862 would continue the policy of counting the mail-in ballot and rejecting the provisional ballot. Now, one question that came up last year in committee was, why count the mail-in ballot? Why not count the provisional ballot? And there are 3 main reasons I want to highlight. One is that we know the absentee ballot will be the appropriate ballot for that voter. There's a chance that if a voter goes to the wrong polling place, they could have the wrong ballot where not all races could be counted. The second reason is administrative efficiency. So counting the mail-in ballot and rejecting the provisional means we can start processing mail-in ballots without waiting to see what provisional ballots are cast on election day. It also, with the existing requirement for if 2 mail-in ballots are received, counting the first one received allows us to not have to wait to see if another ballot comes in. After discussing this with election officials and advocates, I actually will be proposing a slight amendment in this regard for voters who submit 2 absentee or mail-in ballots. Rather than saying that the board should count the first ballot received, we're going to say that the board shall count the first ballot determined to be legally sufficient. Now, the final reason to go with absentee or mail-in ballot rather than the provisional is that we don't want to create an opportunity or an invitation for a do-over. This is a relatively rare occurrence, but we don't want to invite people to submit a second ballot as a chance to change their vote with a replacement. So with that, I will ask for your favorable report and welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Catherine Berry for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Catherine Berry, representing the Maryland Association of Election Officials. I have nothing additional to add other than that we support Delegate Feldmark's bill, and we thank her for submitting this bill. I'm available for any questions you might have. Thank you.
There are a couple of questions. Delegate Buckle. No, you're on mute. Buckle, we've been doing this for like 2 years.
I hit it like 3 times. It doesn't work too well. I vaguely recall this bill from before. And I guess my question is, what happens if someone shows up to vote on election day or early voting, live and in person, and the elections personnel, the clerk, the supervisor says, "Excuse me, ma'am, we have you recorded as having already voted. We have you recorded as you voted by mail." And that individual says, "Well, that's not right. I didn't vote by mail." Maybe they don't recall, but maybe someone else voted them. Maybe, their husband or wife or roommate, whoever it was, said, "Oh yeah, we're both voting for Donald Trump. We both filled the form out. I just sent them in." And the person's like, I didn't vote. I'd like to vote." Would your bill basically say that person couldn't vote if they showed up and said, hey? And then I guess my other question is what happens in the, what we would call the Delta period of I mailed my ballot out on a Monday and the early voting started, say, on a Wednesday. We all understand the vagaries of the United States mail at this point in time. It's not highly likely that if you mail something on a Monday, they're going to have it and they're going to have processed it and logged it in as having been received on a Wednesday. So I mailed on a Monday and I show up on a Wednesday and I go ahead and vote. How do we deal with those two situations? The person who shows up and says, "I didn't send in a mail-in ballot. I'm here live. I want to vote. Something's wrong with your record." Or the person who did mail something in, votes live in that Delta period, and then we receive a mail-in ballot from them after they've already voted in early voting, presumably.
Well, I'll ask Ms. Berry if she wants to respond to that. But just to clarify, if someone has requested an absentee ballot, whether they've returned it or not, when they show up to vote, it will show that they requested an absentee ballot. And I believe that means they would be only able to vote a provisional ballot at the polling place that day. So there's no risk of someone actually voting sort of a regular ballot on either during early voting or on election day if they've requested an absentee
So
ballot.
that's interesting. I didn't know that, and maybe Ms. Berry knows better than I do. I mean, that seems to me to maybe create its own hornet's nest of I decide a month before the election, or I decide to be put on this permanent list. Hey, yeah, it's convenient. I'd like to get it, but I get the absentee ballot sent to me, and for whatever reason, I don't vote it. I forget, or I haven't made up my mind yet, or it's not a high priority for me, or God forbid, if you live in my household, you might have lost it. You didn't pay attention to it just that day. You threw it in the other mail and it got thrown away or got placed somewhere. Is that the law that now that person can't vote other than provisionally? So if I request to get the absentee and for whatever confluence of life events, I don't vote the absentee, but it's election day and I know it's election day and I'm like, I really want to vote. I'm going to run over, stand in line for a few minutes and vote. Now we're telling people that your vote doesn't directly count. It's got to be provisional because you requested many moons ago to be on this list.
Well, Delegate, a provisional ballot doesn't mean the vote doesn't count.
No, it means it counts provisionally.
Well, it's provisional because of the exact scenario that you just described, right? If you had returned your absentee ballot, then and you voted not provisionally, there'd be no opportunity to catch that, right? So I think, right. I mean, I'll let Ms. Berry, or I don't know if Mr. Demarinis wants to chime in on sort of the technicalities, but I think the point you're raising is exactly why they're given a provisional ballot.
Edie, did you want me to go first or? Okay, all right. There was a lot to unpack in that question of yours there. First, I just wanted to say, like in 2020, one of the reasons why we were counting the first received was because we started the canvass before Election Day. And that's important to make this distinction here. As Delegate Folmark mentioned, with the fact that if you request an absentee ballot and then you show up at the polling place, right, under current law, right, the current law where we do the absentee ballot canvass and the provisional ballot canvass after Election Day, right, that person would vote provisionally because they had requested an absentee ballot. And we do not know if they actually casted that absentee ballot or not, because the canvass would have occurred after election day. So you didn't want them to then have it there. That's when it comes in at that point there. So that's why those are there. And additionally, if both ballots come in after election day under current law, right, not taking 2020 because 2020 is an outlier for numerous reasons, but under current law, both ballots would be rejected currently. So, you know, in that case there, this is what this bill is trying to rectify here a little bit here, which is not to disenfranchise voters 100%, but to allow them to at least have one of their fail-safes count. And by doing the absentee first, that's usually something that, you know, I know that Mayo and others, we have other bills that want to increase the canvas like 2020 to start that process. Those are usually easier to process, whereas a provisional ballot, they have to do research on. And because there's an issue, whether it was that the individual counted, requested an absentee ballot, or did not provide ID, necessary to when upon registering to vote. So they have to look up, or there was an address issue there. So there's the provisional status just means that there was some sort of issue at the time of the when they came to vote, and then they get a little tiny informational packet, I guess, or a sheet that tells them that they can go to a website to find out if that vote counted or didn't count. So it's not like they vote provisionally and that there's some sort of weird classification for them. They, at the end of the day, that vote, if it's 100% and they never received an absentee ballot, mail-in ballot, and there was only the provisional ballot, that ballot goes in and that person gets voting credit as a voter, and that it counts 100%. So there's nothing about that there's some sort of distinction on that front there. So I just wanted to distinguish a little bit of what transpired and what happened in 2020.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I don't mean to belabor it. Look, we all understand 99% of elections, none of this really has a particular effect because they're just, they're not that close, within a few hundred votes typically. I do recall there was a congressional election in New York State, I think in the last cycle in 2020, maybe in 2018, that they had 4 months, 6 months of litigation afterward about these types of situations. Some counties that had, did this person vote? Who did the clerk put it in provisionally? Did we get it in the mail? And, we basically, we had 2 congressional elections. We had one in Iowa that was decided by less than 10 votes in this last cycle, that I believe the Republican candidate was actually seated and was subject to quite a bit of litigation because, the United States House of Representatives, we may be getting down to 3, 4, 5, 6 seats may determine an awful lot. And some of those elections, weirdly enough, are very, very close. And that's why I have a particular concern. My take personally is count the vote of the person who showed up and demonstrated that's who they were. If Joe Blow shows up on election day and says, I want to vote, and you don't have any record that you've already received an absentee ballot from Joe Blow, or he says that's not his vote, tear up the absentee ballot, let Joe Blow vote in person, however he or she wants to vote. So that's a little bit different. I think I have the same intent as what Delegate Feldmark's bill is. We let people make sure they get a chance to vote, and their vote is actualized. I would just prefer allowing the person to vote who is physically letting the physical vote that's checked in by the process, the normal process most of us grew up with and live with for many, many decades. I'd rather have that count than we've got to count you provisionally and then go back days or weeks later and do a forensic, so to speak, of whether we got something in the mail or what day we got it, or is it different, I guess. So that's my only concern, but I appreciate, Madam Chair, the indulgence and the chance to find out more about it. Thank you, Jared, very much.
You're welcome.
Questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 862. Circling back to House Bill 815, Delegate Parrott, and then there's one individual signed up afterwards for 2 minutes. So Delegate Parrott, whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. My sound is on. Can you hear me? Great. And I do have a PowerPoint. If I could just share the screen.
I don't think, we're not doing PowerPoints. We can share that with the committee, but we're not doing PowerPoints.
Okay. I did share it with the committee earlier, so you should all have it. Basically, this is House Bill 815, and it's a really simple bill, just saying that if you're running for US Congress, that you need to live in the district where you're running. I live in Western Maryland, and ever since 2012, we haven't had a representative who lived in the district. First it was John Delaney, and then it was David Trone, and even the Republican candidates didn't live in the district. Ami Hober also didn't live in the district. I think it just makes sense that if you're going to represent a place, that you should live in that district. We already have residential requirements for every other geographic based office in the state of Maryland that I know of. The General Assembly, you have to live in the district. County council or county commissioner seats, district-based Board of Education seats, even at large county or Board of Ed seats, you have to live in the county. So it's expected that candidates would live in their own district to be able to represent the people that they're with. The Constitution says the candidates for the House must be at least 25 years old, have lived as a U.S. citizen for here 7 years, be an inhabitant of the state they're running in. So in the U.S. Constitution, you have to live in the state, but they're silent on districts. And so the question is, can we do this law? And I think the answer is yes. People will say it's unconstitutional because they're going to refer to a court case of U.S. Term Limits Incorporated versus Thornton in 1995. And basically in 95, the court, in a very narrow ruling, it was 5-4, said that we could only use the existing law for Congress and the states couldn't add anything to that. But we've already seen that change. The Supreme Court upheld a Pennsylvania Supreme Court case that was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, where they said, with the looking at gerrymandering, they said it was fine for the states to have their own rules. Now, Justice Thomas, he was one of the four with the dissenting ruling, and he wrote this. He said, nothing in the Constitution deprives the people of each state of the power to prescribe eligibility requirements for the candidates who seek to represent them in Congress. Of course, that doesn't make sense. The Constitution is simply silent on this question, and where the Constitution is silent, it raises no bar by action by the states. When that court case was decided, basically 7 of the 9 members are gone, and the 8th will leave shortly. And so that only leaves Justice Thomas left, and he would be a yes vote. And really, it comes down to like states' rights or not. And the current makeup of the Supreme Court would clearly say yes, that we would have the right to do this. So I think the question for the committee is, do you think the congressional candidate should live in the district? And if you do, vote for the bill. And if it needs to go to court, we'll win at the U.S. Supreme Court level. So with that, I would just encourage us to please vote favorably for House Bill 815. This doesn't affect the next election. It's not about 2022. It's about 2024 moving forward, just having a good policy for people who are representing us in Congress. And with that, I'd like to open up to any questions.
There was one other individual, I don't see him in here, but I will call him Vince McAvoy, who signed up to testify. And I don't see him in the room. So are there any questions for Delegate Parrott? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 815. Thank you, Delegate Parrott.
Thank you.
Delegate Buckle, House Bill 844, and there's yourself and 2 other folks signed up who will have 2 minutes. So whenever you're ready, Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 844 relates to a topic that our committee has heard, I think several bills, at least a couple of bills so far already this year. And it's about fundamentally transparency and honesty and trying to bring some semblance of just common English language and usage to your property taxes. And I'll be honest with you, the most important part of the bill to me, for those in the committee who have the interest or the ability to follow along, is page 5 of the bill, lines 26 through 28, that provide a clarity or a clarifying notice to property owners of what the difference in their real property taxes would be if the locality, the county or the municipality adopted the constant yield rate. Constant yield is a very complicated area. I frankly don't like, and I had this conversation with, I think, Delegate Smith and some others. I think we should all work together and scrap this very complex and complicated language of trying to divine out so that people can read it, what the constant yield rate is. And we should simply tell people, property owners, this is what your property tax can be. So if your assessment has gone up, we did not change as a county or as a municipality, we did not change the tax rate. So if your assessment goes up, you're going to be paying more taxes. It is a de facto tax hike on you. It is not the tax hike of the county commissioners or of your city mayor and council. They did not decide to hike your taxes. Your taxes are going to be higher because the State Department of Assessments and Taxation has determined that your property is worth more. And conversely, people should have an understanding that the localities have the ability to ameliorate that somewhat by changing their tax rate, but are keeping a constant tax rate. Now, if the locality has chosen to reduce their tax rate, they should be able in clear and plain language to say, hey, we've reduced the overall tax rates. It may result in a reduction of your property taxes if your assessment has maintained stable or gone down. It may not result in a decrease in your actual taxes if SDAT has increased your assessment. People, we heard from, I think, Councilman Costello from Baltimore City, how people complain frequently to local elected officials about, my damn taxes went up. And people, I think, have complained to me and to others of, I don't understand. I guess the state raised my taxes. I'm paying more taxes every year. And in Maryland, we have an issue. We have a housing market in many places where I'm sure many of you live. It doesn't apply quite as much to my jurisdiction. I wish it did. We certainly have some housing inflation, but some of you live in places where 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you bought a house for $400,000. And now SDAT tells you it's $550,000 or $600,000. And you don't have any intention of selling that home because you're raising your children there. Or it's convenient for you, or it's your dream home. But you're paying more in taxes year after year after year after year, even with the various homeowners credits and the caps on how much it can go up. It is a de facto tax raise every year. And I don't blame, I'm sure my friends from Mako, and they are my friends, they're articulating a good principle, I think, that it's not their fault. My friends from MML, I'm sure that they will say, well, we don't want this. And there's another component to the bill, not to get off topic, that requires mailing, simply because I got to be honest with you, who reads the legal notices in the newspaper now? And I'm an attorney. I get the Daily Record every day of my life, or every day that it's published. No one goes back and reads the legal notices in the newspaper other than, a very narrow population group. There's some testimony about the costs that mailing this type of notice would cause. I'd point out that the estimated cost is $1 million spread out over 24 jurisdictions. And that is, quite frankly, a drop in a bucket full of buckets. Even in, significant Montgomery County, the cost is $155,000 estimated a year in what I believe is $1 billion budget. So, that's like normal people losing a quarter, while walking across the street. It's not something that they're going to, is going to cripple their budget. I'm hopeful that the committee has some interest at a time when it's appropriate to sit down and have some real discussions. It doesn't have to be the language in this bill. It doesn't have to be the language in Delegate Smith's bill. This is just what DLS did. It's what they put together with the directives they had. But we need to tell our constituents, our shared constituents, this is what's going on with your property taxes. Taxes aren't just what we charge them at the state level for income taxes. It's not just sales taxes. It's not just federal corporate taxes. Sometimes people's largest tax burden in a given year is that check that they write or that gets factored in and that constantly changes into their mortgage payment calculator of money that they're paying to just stay in the same home that they already live in. And they're not realizing any value on the sale. If you're living in that home for a lengthy period of time, it's not like the appreciation has a direct economic impact on your life, unless you're going out and taking out a home equity loan, a HELOC of some sort. You're really not getting anything out of, hey, my house increased in assessment, but I'm not going to sell it. But I had to pay $30,000 more in taxes over an 8, 10, 12-year period just to stay in my house. If that's the way it's going to be, I'd like people to know that and know why in simple, plain English. I'm not sure this bill is perfect to do that. This bill is actually modeled after a bill that passed in the state of Kansas and was extremely bipartisan. I think it was almost unanimous in the Kansas legislature and signed by the Democratic governor of Kansas, and actually made sort of a template and a feature of her campaign and her efforts at tax reform. And so that's the purpose of the bill, is to initiate that conversation to get to truth in taxation, which is sometimes just as important as what level we set the taxes at. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Buckle, next for 2 minutes, Kevin Canale, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here in opposition to House Bill 844. I agree with Delegate Buckle and his intent to make this easier to understand. We're here because of the fiscal note for mailing the notice, but also because, you know, I think that the notice in this bill is still somewhat legalese, right? I think that mailing out a notice that's sort of redundant and confusing doesn't do us any good to, I think, what everybody here wants to do, which is to make this easier to understand. We want taxpayers to understand exactly what's going on with their rates. So I think
Cut out, Mr. Canale.
He just knows that it's a great bill, Madam Chair. He you know.
I don't think he's still on here. I don't see him.
He cut completely off of my screen. He must have had a technological. There, he's back.
Oh,
okay. You can, you know, I don't know where you want to pick up. You can start over. You cut out pretty early.
I'm sorry. Am I back, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'll wrap up quickly. I think we're happy to continue these conversations. I appreciate the conversations with Delegate Buckle. We just think that a redundant notice that still is sort of hard to understand doesn't really accomplish the shared goals of, I think, what this committee wants to do, and certainly what we want to do. So again, we want to work on this issue, and I appreciate Delegate Buckle for trying to tackle it, but we'd ask for an unfavorable on House Bill 844.
And Justin Fiore, please, for 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. Justin Fiore here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League in opposition to House Bill 844. As introduced, the bill does not eliminate the confusion caused by the constant yield rate, which is something we've already discussed in this committee. It only adds more cost to local governments to promote it. But I'm also really sympathetic to the sponsor's call for clarity and communication with residents. I think it's become clear that the concept needs reform. MML's committed to figuring out what that might look like with you, just maybe not the reform in this bill. So we respectfully request an unfavorable report on House Bill 844.
So I see there's a question by Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully Stan can answer this question. The constant yield rate is set by the local jurisdiction, am I correct? So they could either lower it or raise it. And when they raise it, it actually, to meet their budgets, they could lower it if their budgets were come in lower. Am I correct in what I'm saying?
Well, the property tax rates, the counties and municipalities have complete discretion in choosing their property tax rates, but the constant yield rate is a calculation. It's a rate that's fixed based on what the revenue was in the previous year and what the assessments are in the current year.
Right. Isn't it true that the county can lower the constant yield rate in order to lower taxes?
Sure, they could lower their rate. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and a lot of times they use the constant yield rate. Well, I'm sorry, they use a constant yield rate to meet their budgetary needs. Am I correct?
I mean, they can set their rates, whatever it needs to be to meet their budgetary needs, which it could be the constant yield rate or it could be something else.
Okay. Well, I just want to clarify it. So I just want to clarify it one more time. So the constant yield rate could be lowered by the county, which will lower the county portion of your property taxes, which is the largest portion of your property taxes. Am I correct?
they could always lower the rate to be the constant yield rate or a lower rate. They have total discretion.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be clarified because I've had this discussion with a gentleman by the name of Don Mason. He's passed now. He's a he was a World War II veteran. He used to knock on my door. I'll tell you a real quick story. Hey, Bobby, I want a cup of coffee. He didn't say no to Don. And he told me all this, and he wanted me to learn it. I just want to make sure I was saying how it is correctly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 844. And I'm going to call House Bill 745 with Delegate Kaiser. And you're going to see a lot of motion because my computer is like about to automatically restart and I can't stop it. So, but we're working on it. If you see me go in and out, no worries. But
right.
Delegate Kaiser, whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you. I hope you don't pop in and out too much, but hope to see you through this. I'm here today on House Bill 745, and it's a pleasure to see everyone. And I want to thank everyone for their past support on this bill on risk limiting audits. And while I don't see her on my screen right now, thanking Delegate Wilkins, who has co-sponsored this. This bill is, again, about risk limiting audits. And from my perspective, it's really about election integrity. Nothing matters more to our democracy than free and fair elections and citizens' beliefs that our elections are free and fair. Just to give people a reminder, risk limiting audits, otherwise known as RLAs, are seen as the gold standard for ballot auditing. And I'm glad to describe in greater detail if someone wants to know how RLAs work, why it's better than the current way we do our audits, and why it's ultimately necessary. There's even details on the type of RLAs. And again, we can get into that if you would like. I do just want to point out that RLAs are far superior to our current auditing procedures, and only RLA can correct a wrong election outcome and ensure that the proper winners are certified. I didn't introduce this because of anything recent. I didn't introduce this because of anything that happened in the election 2 years ago. I've been introducing it before then, just as a fail-safe. This is there just in case, and it creates a process for when and how much or how many ballots to audit in a given situation. And so there are so many election security experts who are behind this, in the National Academy of Sciences, so many different groups, Brennan Center for Justice, Common Cause, League of Women Voters, the Democracy Fund. And I will close with something from the National Academy of Sciences about RLAs. The design and development of current computer systems, no matter how well constructed, cannot anticipate and prevent all the possible means of attack. And they further say, quote, there's no realistic mechanism to fully secure vote casting and tabulation computer systems from cyber threats. And that's why the manual audit that would come out of a risk limiting audit is necessary. So I thank you all for your favorable consideration of House Bill 745. And you'll hear from some election experts on even more detail. And I urge a favorable recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I've switched offices while we're trying to figure this out. So next, everyone else will have 2 minutes. Purvi Vora, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Delegates Kaiser and Wilkins, and other committee members. My name is Purvi Vora, and I am a tenured professor of computer science at the George Washington University. Some of you may remember me from previous committee meetings and previous testimony. My area of expertise is voting system security, including statistical election audits. Congratulations to the committee on a strong audit bill that serves the interests of Maryland's voters in House Bill 745. I strongly support it. The literature in the field of election security is clear and nonpartisan. Computerized election systems are vulnerable to both error and intentional alteration. A software image audit, currently the only tabulation audit performed before certification of Maryland's elections, relies on data provided by the voting system and is hence also vulnerable. It cannot be the basis of an audit of the election outcome, though it may be useful in identifying problems with equipment. What is needed is a pre-certification audit, which relies on manual examination of the paper ballots. A risk limiting audit is one such audit and has been used across the US already in multiple states in various as pilot and statutory audit. And a risk limiting audit, for example, with a 10% risk limit in Maryland for its wide margin elections in 2020 would have needed to examine a smaller number of ballots than the 2% that is currently required. This bill has all the elements that we generally ask for in risk limiting audits. For example, it requires pre-certification of at least one statewide contest and one countywide contest and so on. I won't repeat the features of this bill, but I would urge that the state administrator and the state board of elections consult experts, convene some kind of panel of experts to determine how best to do an audit for Maryland's particular circumstances. That is one thing that I would encourage them to do. I understand that
Ms. Vora, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your testimony, please.
Sure. So I have a few friendly suggestions in my written testimony. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. Congratulations again on a very fine.
Thank you. Mark Lindeman, please, for 2 minutes.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury and members of the committee. My name is Mark Lindeman. I am a director of Verified Voting, which is a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization whose mission is to strengthen democracy for all voters by promoting the responsible use of technology and promotions. And we think this bill is just absolutely spot on. Briefly, as has been mentioned, risk limiting audits are designed to efficiently confirm that election outcomes are correct, that machine tabulators haven't altered the outcomes before the results are made final. Because that's really when voters need reassurance, not 120 days after the election. It's important that risk limiting audits are implemented efficiently and that the implementation be responsive to the distinctive needs and circumstances of Maryland election officials. I think that this bill is very sensibly constructed. It begins with pilot audits in 2022, so the election officials have a chance to refine and even experiment with appropriate procedures. The requirements stipulated in the bill are very sensible ones, as Professor Vora mentioned, including both statewide and local contests. But the bill wisely delegates to the State Board of Elections most of the responsibility for specifying the details. So risk limiting audits, as Delegate Kaiser mentioned, are flexible. They can be implemented in various ways. And this bill lets Maryland election officials find the best possible solutions to provide high assurance to voters before election results are finalized. And I'd be happy to help field any questions.
Thank you. Next, Morgan Drayton, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Morgan Drayton, Policy and Engagement Manager for Common Cause Maryland. And thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in favor of HB 745 today. This legislation is a critical first step needed to ensure that the results of our elections reflect the will of Maryland's voters. If and when our voting count machines fail, HB 745 presents an automatic process to check software errors and correct them if they're wrong. Maryland's system of marking and casting paper ballots is a really great deterrent to any kind of cyber attack. Of course, those paper ballots can be manually reviewed and recounted, but the process of hand counting those ballots is very time consuming. If Maryland establishes that election officials are able to use a risk limiting audit, that workload will be significantly diminished. With a risk limiting audit, officials need only manually review and tally as many ballots as are needed to provide strong evidence that the machine generated count is accurate. And as Delegate Kaiser mentioned, election administration and security experts agree that these risk limiting audits are the gold standard of post-election audits. In an era when the integrity of our election systems are facing unprecedented domestic and international threats. These audits provide an additional layer of election protection to provide voters with confidence that the reported winner is the actual winner. And for those reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you.
Next, House Bill 1093, Delegate Plakovich-Carr, and there are two witnesses after you. So whenever you're ready, Delegate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Plakovich-Carr, here to present House Bill 1093. This legislation would allow political candidates to use campaign funds to pay for babysitters or other caregivers for their dependents while the candidate is knocking doors, attending a fundraiser, or engaging in other campaign activities. We all know how hard it is to run for office. It's especially hard to balance family responsibilities with campaigning. I ran for office twice before my son was 4 years old, and I was fortunate that my husband and mother-in-law could pick up the slack there in terms of watching an infant and later a toddler while I was out knocking doors practically every day for months, but not everybody has that luxury or has that same family situation. For some candidates, their only option is to hire a caregiver for their family members. And any of you who have hired a babysitter or caregiver in recent years know how expensive those services are and how quickly that adds up. HB 1093 would allow candidates to pay for such caregiving expenses as a campaign expense. This is already allowed as an expense in Maryland for childcare per a 2019 advisory opinion issued by the State Board of Elections. This bill codifies that existing rule and broadens it to include caregiving services for an adult child with a disability or an elderly parent who resides with the candidate and who requires more intense caregiving. In conclusion, HB 1093 is a common sense measure that will help Marylanders to run for office regardless of their personal finances and family situations. Thank you.
Sarah Hogue, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Haig. I am the political director of Vote Mama Foundation and here to speak on behalf of the organization in strong support of House Bill 1093. In 2018, Vote Mama Foundation founder and CEO Luba Gretchen Shirley petitioned the Federal Election Commission and became the first woman to receive federal approval to use her campaign funds on childcare. This groundbreaking decision was approved by a unanimous bipartisan vote, and over 50 federal candidates have since used their campaign funds to pay for childcare, both moms and dads, Democrats and Republicans. However, the ruling on Luba's request does not apply to candidates running for state and local office. Vote Mama Foundation is the only organization working with legislators across the country to introduce legislation to approve the use of campaign funds for childcare and dependent care by state and local candidates. We know that the first step to empowering a diverse pipeline of working caregivers to run for office is for candidates to no longer have to consider the cost of dependent care in weighing their decision to run. I think we can all agree that our country needs middle and working class representation now more than ever, and campaign funds for dependent care breaks down a critical economic barrier for working caregivers running for office. Altogether, 15 states have passed legislation allowing the use of campaign funds for childcare. In this legislative session, 14 states, including Maryland, have introduced similar legislation. We hope that Maryland will become the 16th state to codify the use of campaign funds for childcare. Vote Mama Foundation thanks Delegate Plakovich-Carr for her leadership on this legislation and Delegates Feldmark and Jones for their support. We urge the committee to support HB 1093. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Morgan Drayton, please, for 2 minutes.
Hello again. For the record, my name is Morgan Drayton, Policy and Engagement Manager for Common Cause Maryland, and we are in support of HB 1093. As more parents of young children begin to run for elected office, we are thankfully seeing increased public awareness of the additional barriers they face to getting on the ballot. The job of campaigning is very family unfriendly, if we're honest. Candidates keep long, unpredictable hours in order to attend with events, meet with constituents, as you all know. And the times that they're working don't always match up with local school and childcare center schedules. Additionally, the cost of running a competitive campaign, which depending on the office sought can run into the millions of dollars, can be debilitating to candidates from working families. especially when the average cost of childcare per child per year has reached upwards of $8,000 across the country. So finding quality childcare is expensive and difficult, which puts an extra burden on low-income candidates and single parents who are statistically more likely to be women. Candidates often end up taking a leave of absence or having to quit their jobs altogether in order to run for office. And that's just not options that's feasible for candidates from these low income households or who are single parents. We believe that normalizing childcare expenditures as part of a campaign is a good step towards making elected office more inclusive and accessible for people in more diverse circumstances. And for those reasons, we respectfully urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the delegate or the witnesses? Okay, thank you very much, Delegate. Next, calling House Bill 795, Delegate Lukey, and after Delegate Lukey, there are 5 witnesses who will have 2 minutes each. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I appreciate that this session, the Ways and Means Committee has had robust competition to identify the nerdiest, wonkiest, most abstruse tax bill we could possibly come up with. We've had bills on private letter rulings, we've had bills on constant yield tax rate, but I just want to say in all necessary humility that HB 795, gross receipts tax on short-term lease or rental of heavy equipment alterations, should win that competition. I'm happy to present this bill to you. I have to take you back in time 12 years to explain it. So 12 years ago, the legislature made a change to the personal property tax law related to the rental of or lease of heavy equipment. And the deal that was struck at the time transitioned the personal property tax on such equipment to a gross receipts tax. And in order to prevent significant fiscal impact, because there was some worry about that on localities, it also created a true up where essentially what would have been what revenue would have been achieved through the personal property tax is compared to the gross receipts tax, and the company is responsible for making up any difference. Now, since that time, there have been some issues with this particular tax, and this bill is intended to correct those issues. Those issues are rooted in a basic principle of taxation, which is that the government doesn't tax itself, right? Under the personal property tax, local governments were exempt from the personal property tax on this rental or lease of heavy equipment. But under the gross receipts tax, the localities are essentially paying the tax to themselves. Through the gross receipts tax. It's a little bit bizarre. And this bill is essentially intended to correct that. It exempts localities from any burden associated with the payment of the gross receipts tax. Now, of course, that then creates an issue with the true up that was happening between the personal property and the gross receipts tax. So the bill also eliminates that true up, which has the added advantage of eliminating an administrative headache both for the companies themselves and the localities. Because it is a hassle, frankly, to do that true up every year. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to, I believe, Mr. Favaza's up next and take any questions from the committee. I urge the committee to give the bill a favorable report.
Yes, John Favaza for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm John Favaza with Manus Cannon and Associates. I'm here today on behalf of United Rentals. Thanks to Delegate Lukey for putting in this nerdy bill that I actually recall from my days as a staff person. So it's come full circle and I'm working on it again 12 years later. I just encourage all of you to take a look at the fiscal note in the bill. It provides an excellent summary of the issue and also helps explain the rationale for this bill. It makes clear a couple of things: that the gross receipts tax collections on heavy equipment account for a very minimal amount of overall county revenues. There's only 5 counties that even bother to itemize this tax in their county budget documents. And as Delegate Lukey pointed out, the administration of this true up is burdensome on all parties. It requires the local government to calculate 2 different methods for each business that's subject to the tax. As Ed Noonan from United Rentals can explain, he frequently has to remind and encourage many counties to even perform this calculation. So after 12 years of implementation, we feel, based on feedback we've gotten from some county governments, that this is an appropriate time to reflect on what the experience has been and consider changes to the original legislation. So we look forward to working with Mako and the committee on this, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Ed Noonan, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ed Noonan. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for United Rentals. We are an equipment rental business with a significant presence in Maryland. We operate out of 18 rental locations in 8 different counties. I'm here today to speak in favor of HB 795. In 2010, when this legislation was passed, it exempted rental equipment from the personal property tax and replaced it with a gross receipts tax. Since that legislation has been in place, we have had several instances of counties and local agencies questioning whether or not they should be subject to this tax. And recently, Montgomery County is the latest one to raise this concern. While we agree with them, we believe that a technical correction is necessary to specifically exempt governments from the tax or specifically state that they are subject to the tax. There needs to be some clarity to remove any ambiguity. We support HB 795 and believe that the changes recommended in the bill follow sound tax policy. Specifically, the bill provides an exemption from the gross receipts tax for governments. From a practical perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense for a county to pay this tax to the taxpayer and then turn around and get it back at some point in the future. The bill also removes an onerous true-up process that is administratively burdensome for taxpayers, states, and counties. With the exemption for the government, our experience is that this is really not necessary with the true-up, and there's ebbs and flows from year to year, and those differences are usually timing differences that are made up or reset in the following year. This is not a revenue source and not something that can be budgeted for. This change proposed here will allow Maryland to follow several other states with similar statutes in place today. Those states include Colorado, Indiana, North Carolina, Oregon, South Carolina, Virginia, Washington, and Wyoming. They all exempt governments from the tax, and none of them have a true-up provision. We are open to continuing working with Mako and others to address any concerns that they may have, and we're also open to any suggestions they may have on the bill. Thank you for your time, and I urge your support in passing 795, House Bill 795. Thank you.
We are definitely not the senators. Next, John Mckellen, please, for 2 minutes. You're on mute, sir. You're still on mute. I see bottom left-hand corner.
I got it.
Okay, there you go.
I got it. I'm sorry. I was moving away to be able to look at my notes. So I apologize. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury and Vice Chair Washington, and Delegate Lukey. I was one of the nerds that was involved in this in 2010. You can tell how bad I am with technology, so I'm dating myself. I'm John Mckellen. I'm Vice President for Government Affairs and Chief Economist at the American Rental Association. We represent the equipment and event rental industry nationally. I have about 100 members in Maryland who would be classified as likely classified as heavy equipment operators based on the information that they provide us. And I just want to say that we support fully the passage of HB 795. I want to focus on a couple of points, and I think the first point has been made very clear, and that is that, based on the fiscal note, there's really no effect on state revenues. There is some effect on state expenditures here because of the way that the payment of the tax works. But there is potential decreases in both county municipal gross receipts and administrative costs. That's what the fiscal note says. But it's been pointed out, counties are collecting the tax, or paying the tax and then collecting the tax back, essentially. So there's really, it all nets out. It comes out to zero here. And so there can't really, in my view, be any material impact on revenues here. The second point that I would make, and this is, we've talked about the true up some here, and that is that if you exempt the local governments, county governments, municipalities, if you exempt them from payment of this tax, and you leave the true up in place, basically what you're doing is you're creating basically a built-in shortfall for rental companies, because now the amount of money that they would have been collecting if they had taxed the local entities is not going to be there, but their calculation under the old property tax valuation method is still going to be there. So you're building in a shortfall for the rental companies that is, frankly, would be unfair. So that's the reason that we believe that the true up, the elimination of the true up, the repeal of the true up provision really needs to be part of this. It's an integral part of this. So it's not just.
Mr. Mckellen, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your testimony.
Yes, yes. And well, that is my final point there.
Awesome. Perfect then. Thank you. Next, Michael Sanderson for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, I'm Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties. I too was a nerd on the ground floor in 2010 with the bill that put the wheels in place. A few thoughts here. We're support with amendments on the bill. I want to reflect that I think there's an opportunity to work something out here. A couple reflections on how we got to this point that I think are important, particularly for members of the committee who don't have the fond recollections of the 2010 compromise. The industry came to you all saying, we don't need a tax cut. We just need a realignment. We want to be able to pay this in a different fashion. Paying the property tax on the equipment, like every other business in Maryland does, is difficult and inconvenient for the nature of our business. We need a special deal. That's how this gross receipts tax was born. It's not an accident that the General Assembly created a gross receipts tax to replace a property tax. A property tax on the equipment is blind to who the ultimate user is. If you rent it out or let it be used by somebody, it doesn't matter who the end user is. The property tax is a burden on the owner of the property. Same thing with a gross receipts tax. That was the logic of doing it this way. You've heard mention, testimony saying, well, if it's just the county taxing the county, it's a wash. Maybe true, but we have an awful lot of federal government facilities here in Maryland. So rental on the Naval Academy or at NIH or in Social Security or whatever, all sorts of other government facilities and government users would be exempted by this bill. There will be a hole in the boat. I'm not going to tell you it's $100 million. It's not. But this bill presents a realignment of the deal. It used to be we'll pay all the taxes, we'll true it up at the end. This bill says, let's get rid of that. Let's make this into a tax cut and not pass on as many revenues. We could work this out, but it's not dollar for dollar.
Thank you. And last, Kevin Canali, please, for 2 minutes.
I think Mr. Canali has had to cover another committee, so I've already covered things for Mako, Madam Chair.
Questions? I see Delegate Buckle and then Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So initially, when I hit my button, I just wanted to have Delegate Lutke say "true up" one more time. I just wanted to hear him, true it up a little bit more. That's an interesting phrase. But in listening to all the testimony from everybody, I did have a general question. And Mr. Sanderson just said something. Is this one of these situations where we really can't interpret the bill as either a tax cut, so to speak, so that the companies subject to the tax, and then ultimately in most situations they pass it along one way or another to the end user, to the consumer. So neither the companies are really getting a tax cut, but also the governments aren't really losing a lot of revenue. Mr. Sanderson said, we don't want to make it a tax cut. Is there any analysis? I tried to read through the fiscal note. Is this revenue neutral and just sort of an administrative thing about the application of this tax really doesn't work? It makes a lot of sense. The one provision why are we charging county and state governments this tax if they're renting the equipment and then the money goes back to the county or state governments anyway? But does anyone have a theory on that? Is this really going to wind up being revenue neutral, or is it a de facto tax cut?
I think in fairness, Delegate, you'll find that I would tend to lean more on the revenue neutral side. I think you'd find Mako leaning more on this has some revenue impact, although I think, relatively limited. I'd also like to point out, in retribution for Mr. Sanderson appearing in opposition to my bill or for amendments on my bill, that there's only one member of this committee who was on this committee in 2010. The entire rest of the committee has turned over, and that's Delegate Boatler.
Does Delegate Boatler know how to true up? Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll have more time to dig into the particulars. Thank you.
Delegate Buckle, you sounded quasi-cool when you said true up. I like you put a little oomph on it. You put a little something on it.
Is it uncool if I lift my hands there? Nobody does that.
No,
anymore,
yeah.
right?
Then you just took it to a place that should not be happening.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm happy with not being the guy who does that. I'm good. Thank you.
Delegate Plakovich-Carr, then Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think literally every person who's spoken so far before me used the term true up, but I'm still not clear. What is that referring to in the context of this bill? Can someone explain that?
I can take a stab at it, Delegate. The way this was constructed was the companies who are engaged in the rental business, they basically are charged gross receipts tax. They collect it and submit it, and then they run a second calculation on what would have been their property tax bill. If what they've collected in gross receipts tax is less than the old school property tax, they make up the difference to the local government in a true up. So that's the meaning of the idea of the year end hold harmless, basically.
Thank you.
Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for your testimony, and thank you, Delegate Lutke, for bringing us the nerdiest of nerdy tax bills. Of course, I have to accept that as a challenge and dive right in. So I'm interested in the concept of the true up and this notion that county governments should not be paying the gross receipts tax. I guess there's a concern that if we exempt local governments from the gross receipts tax, then there's a problem with the true up, right? Because it creates this shortfall. But are we sure that's a problem? Because is that possibly truing up the true up if governments shouldn't be paying taxes? I mean, I'm not sure that. I don't see the rationale for why that revenue should be or shouldn't be included as part of what the company makes up in the true up. So can someone speak to that?
I think, Delegate, that sounds like it's a question for local government. So I'll try and take a swing at it and say, this idea of a gross receipts tax, this is not unique to heavy machinery. Your electric bill in Maryland, electric companies, public service companies pay a gross receipts tax, and it shows up as an itemized line on your electric bill. I pay it, but so does the Naval Academy, and so does Anne Arundel County government, because we've decided that that's the sort of thing that should be borne by all users of the electrical grid, the whole system. So rather than it be a sales tax where you would say, oh, a variety of governments and charities and many other tax exempt organizations should just be out, everybody's in. We do the same thing in Maryland with our stormwater charges. The jurisdictions who have those charges that were established by the state some years ago, same thing. The rain falls on everybody's property, so you pay it whether you're a government, whether you're a church, or whether you're a private citizen or business. There's two ways to go with those tax structures. When this was created, this committee years ago chose to say this should be a gross receipts tax rather than a sales tax. And rather than saying tax exempt entities should be out, it was established as a gross receipts tax because it's really a burden on the own.
Oh, so I don't think that was just me. He froze.
No, it seems like Mako's having some issues with their.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Madam
Delegate,
Chair.
this is Ed Noonan from United
Okay.
Reynolds. Maybe I can help
Revenue
clarify
neutral.
that.
There might be a fair debate whether
oh,
it's
okay,
a big
so,
law.
Mr. Sanderson, you froze, and so Delegate Feldmark, do you just want to follow up where he left off?
Yeah, I guess just a follow-up question there then. If the county is paying the gross receipts tax and then getting the, collecting the tax and the true up, I guess this notion that it's all a wash if you didn't have to pay it and didn't get the true up, I'm assuming counties only represent a small portion of the customer base engaging in these rentals. So I don't see why we should assume that would be a wash. So I'm not sure if anyone can speak to that.
Delegate, it's a good question. And I think there's, governments are kind of a small percentage of the overall makeup of this. But I think if you go back, and I just want to kind of clarify maybe something before, the whole idea is that this equipment doesn't sit somewhere and stay there for a period of time. So unlike other personal property that sits somewhere and it's there for a whole year or multiple years, makes sense under that property tax scheme to tax it that way. This equipment is totally different. It's going to move wherever there's demand, very mobile. And so states have decided that, like Maryland did, that there's a better capture mechanism for this tax. And so that's where this gross receipts was put in place. I think what we're saying is the way that it's set up today, there's a true up process which says if the property tax that's calculated, if it's this amount and under this gross receipts tax, you collect this amount. If it's different, if you collect more, we don't get a refund back. So it's basically the true up's only going one way. It's only going to the governments. So if if the property tax is less, there's no benefit going to the rental companies. And so what we're saying is we acknowledge that there's a problem, and from a policy perspective, we agree that governments shouldn't be taxed because it is you are paying that to yourself. If we're going to do that, there's going to be an incremental hit to that true up because of that. And because we're already not getting that refund back if we over collect, we think that there should be, either doing away with it or modifying it so that you're making that a fair and really going after revenue neutrality if that's really what the concern is. Does that make sense?
I think so. Thank you. So really, as long as it's revenue neutral, you're okay with it being revenue neutral as long as it fixes your sort of administrative concerns.
Correct. And correct, Delegate. And we're not opposed to specifically put language in to say that they are subject to the tax. There is nothing in there today. And I think that's what creates the administrative challenge.
So if we simply clarified that they were subject to the tax, that would fix your problem?
I think that would address part of it, but I don't think that Mako's members would want to go in that direction. And that's what we're open to talking with them about.
Okay, thank you.
I'd also add, Madam Chair, if it's okay, to Mr. Sanderson's comments earlier. I think there's a difference between the examples of taxation that he mentions, which arguably are more in line with user fees, right? Stormwater management fees, electric fees, which largely go to pay for certain specified items, and something like the personal property tax or this gross receipts tax, which is general taxation, right? It's a different type of taxation, arguably.
Questions, and no one else wants to nerd out on this piece of legislation. Okay, with that concludes the testimony on House Bill 795. Thank you very much. Next, House Bill 923, Delegate Valderrama. How are you?
I'm good. I am laughing that you just said no one wants to nerd out on Delegate Lutke's bill. Okay, with that said, good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, esteemed members of the Great Ways and Means Committee. For the record, Chris Valderrama here to present House Bill 923. My legislation, what it seeks to do is to provide an alternative method to prove eligibility for a property tax exemption under Section 7-208 of the Property Tax Article of the Maryland Code. Under current law, Maryland provides a property tax exemption to survivors of military veterans who die in the line of duty, or to survivors of disabled veterans who are 100% permanently disabled at the time of their death, or who are declared so posthumously. So my legislation does not change. It does not change the eligibility criteria for this exemption. What the legislation does do, I believe, is simple. It merely expands the list of documentation which can prove eligibility during the application process for a property tax exemption. So what the bill seeks to do is to align Section 7208's application criteria with its definition section and allow the use of dependency and indemnity documentation to prove eligibility. So this will prevent some survivors from losing an important benefit because they do not have the correct VA form, which in this case is known as the disability rating card. And the best way that I can explain why this change is necessary, and basically the impetus of the bill, is to describe the unfortunate experience of a constituent of mine. So last year in the 21 session, I was contacted by the son-in-law of my constituent. His father-in-law was physically present during, unfortunately, nuclear testing in the South Pacific back in the mid-50s. Several years ago, and many years after my constituent's military service, her husband, the deceased, the veteran, was diagnosed with a very aggressive and fast-moving type of cancer, and unfortunately soon died initially after his diagnosis. So his cancer was one of a group of cancers that the United States Congress declared was presumptively caused by his exposure to radiation during the nuclear testing. So the widow, my constituent, applied for and was granted dependency and indemnity compensation benefits from the VA, which are only available to survivors of veterans who died in the line of duty or to survivors of veterans who die from a service-connected illness and were totally disabled at the time of death or posthumously declared so. That would be my constituent's husband. The dependency and indemnity requirements are exactly the same requirements as for a survivor's tax exemption under the current Maryland Code. So as part of her application for dependency and indemnity benefits, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs determined that my constituent's husband was 100% disabled posthumously, but they did not issue a separate form declaring him 100% disabled. So this form is known in the military as a disability, as I mentioned, disability rating form or card, and is often issued to living veterans who have been injured during their service and are seeking VA benefits or services. So when my constituent applied for the Maryland property tax exemption, for which she was otherwise eligible, she was denied because she did not have the separate Veterans Administration disability rating form as required. So my constituent never applied for a VA disability rating because her spouse's cancer was so virulent and he died so quickly that no one in the family honestly ever thought to even apply for one. And while she did not have a disability rating card, my constituent did have the equivalent VA verification of disability that was determined as part of her dependency and indemnity compensation documentation. So unfortunately, even though the tax article includes a disabled veteran survivor as one who has dependency and indemnity benefits in its definition section, this documentation was not listed in the application portion of the statute. So my proposed legislation would allow folks like my constituent and other survivors like her to use alternative VA-issued documentation in lieu of a disability rating form when applying for the tax exemption. Again, it's just an alternative option. So to be clear, my constituent could probably apply for a VA disability rating posthumously, but I don't know that for sure, which is why I wanted to proceed with this legislation, even though I had to wait a whole year to bring, because I could not help her last year, unfortunately. So what I do know for sure is that, and I mean this respectfully, that the VA's administration is pretty known for its bureaucratic hoops, which frequently require professional assistance to navigate. And I believe the process of applying for a VA disability rating can be so intimidating, and particularly for our seniors and grieving applicants, that it deters some survivors from ever applying for one, even when they could receive additional benefits. So my constituent, she is not a young woman. She is very mature and wise in her age. And while her spouse died from an illness caused, as I said, by radiation exposure during what he sustained during serving our country, I think I can speak for a lot of us here on this Zoom that it is so unfair to unnecessarily deny someone like her the benefits because she did not have a specific form, though she did have documentation that provided the same information that would have been on the card had she applied for it. So finally, I know that the department, it's because we've had conversations with my staff, that the Department of Assessment and Taxation, they have provided you guys in Ways and Means a letter of information. I always am killed when that's now referred to as letter of information that disputes the adequacy of the language in my legislation. So while I respectfully disagree with the department, I've worked with their office to resolve their concerns and have supplied an amendment that I hope is in your package. And if it's not, I am happy to provide it to the committee, which I believe addresses their concerns. And with that said, I am willing to do whatever I need to do to work with this committee, or if it's appointed to a subcommittee, happy to do so in order to prayerfully move this legislation forward and move out of the Ways and Means Committee. And so with that, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and members of Ways and Means, I respectfully urge a favorable report of House Bill 923.
Thank you. There was one other individual signed up to testify, Patrick Weebow, but we do not see him in here. So does anyone have any questions for Delegate Valderrama? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 923. Thank you, Delegate Valderrama.
Thank you, Madam.
Now calling House Bill 867, which is Delegate Eversol's and is being heard jointly with ECM. So we are welcoming Delegates Valderrama, Delegates Arentz, and Delegate Walker with us for this hearing. So whenever you're ready, Delegate Eversol, and there are 7 folks who will come behind you with 2 minutes each to testify.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So nice to be testifying again in front of you, Delegate Walker. What a pleasure on Ways and Means. I bring before you House Bill 867, which is a bill that will create adjustments in the excise tax on alcohol. When we sell alcohol, we get money on both ends. The producers pay an excise tax as they make it. And of course, there's a sales tax at the end, but this one deals with the excise tax. And alcohol has been typically taxed at 3 levels. One level for its excise tax has been for spirits. This is, your whiskeys and your delicious vodkas. The other is pretty much a wine level. And then the third one is a beer. And so spirits are taxed at the highest level, $1.50 per gallon produced. Wine has typically been taxed at the rate of 40 cents per gallon, and beer at 9 cents per gallon. It's pretty much related to, though not directly, but very closely related to the alcohol by volume of each of those. And so if you look, you can see that. I'm not sure if that was the original intent, but you can follow. Spirits typically fall somewhere around 40% alcohol, what we call 80 proof. Wines tend to run between 5.5% and 16%, average out at about 10 or 11, generally speaking. And beer has become more alcoholic lately. In the old days, it was about 4% or 5%. We do get them up around 8 or 9, and sometimes you can find your occasional beer it's higher, but generally beer has been in the 4 to 5, 6% range for alcohol by volume. That means how much alcohol is in the actual drink, considering the entire volume of what's in there. We've had an influx of a new kind of drink in the last several years that is very popular, but there are actually two types and people tend to lump them together. One is what we'll call a canned cocktail. This would be a gin and tonic, but also a vodka and whatever you like. And these tend to run, once they're mixed and made, they tend to run about the same percentages as wine does. The other one's hard seltzer, which is seltzer water that has alcohol in it. It is made much more like beer. It is often malted from barley or fermented from sugar. And so its alcohol content tends to be more comparable to beer. So hard seltzer falls into the same excise tax range as beer. It is taxed at 9 cents per gallon. The canned cocktail, however, running about the same alcohol level as wine, because it has a spirit in it, has been taxed at the rate of an undiluted spirit, $1.50 a gallon. And so there's this great organization in my district called the Guinness Brewery. We're very pleased that it's there. It's not only supplying some very good drinks for people to have, it provides food, but it also is an excellent attraction in the area and draws people from far away and makes us popular in the district. So what they feel and what seems reasonable to me is that canned cocktails should fall, based on their general alcohol by volume, in about the same range as wine. And so rather than being taxed at $1.50 a gallon, bringing it down to, they would argue maybe even the beer level, but they say, look, it's kind of the same alcohol by volume as wine, generally speaking. And so they would like a change in their excise tax on canned cocktails to 40 cents a gallon. And so I'm going to point out that the fiscal note makes a pretty large claim that this could cost us as much as $2 or $3 million a year. I believe the gentleman from Guinness, Dwayne Kratt, who's on my screen, I hope he's on yours, will be soon, will be able to explain why he doesn't think that might be entirely accurate given the large picture. But with that, I'm going to end my testimony and leave it to the next witness.
Thank you. So everyone else will have 2 minutes to testify. Next, Brian Tracy, please, for 2 minutes. Is he on here? Okay, Monica Pierce for 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Pierce. I am in support of this bill. I'm the founder and owner of 10th Ward Distilling Company based out of Frederick, Maryland. We are a local manufacturer here producing spirits and RTDs. Our reach extends to about over 300 wholesale accounts in the state and our retail shop here in Maryland. We produce an 8-ounce can that is sold in 4-packs at an ABV of somewhere between 5 to 7.5% per can cocktail, depending on the product, where you're seeing craft beer at about 12 to 16 ounces per can, and typically now at a much higher ABV, as was mentioned previously, but we're still paying that exorbitantly higher excise tax as if we were to be developing, an 80 proof spirit, for example. And this relates to a lot of challenges that we see in regards to fairness in our industry and how spirits are treated versus wine and beer. Our license renewal fees in the state, for example, are over $2,000 a year, where a brewery typically pays about $200. We're still required to pay taxes on wine gallons versus proof gallons, which is actually an untranslatable mathematical equation that still ends up with us out on the short end and paying more per liquid amount than the others do. And it just ultimately affects our margins and our costs. So most RTDs on the shelf are priced at about $12 a 4-pack. We price ours at $16 to make up for cost challenges like this. Additionally, I've had times where I've even lost money on RTD production because we're experiencing things like supply shortages and material cost increases. When my margin is only, a 25% profit on a can, it's just incredibly challenging for us. So I'm hoping that changing the RTD tax rate to be more fair to those in our industry and our state would alleviate these challenges. It would allow us to properly compete in the market, increase our profits, and of course, grow our sales to contribute more money back to the state. I thank everybody for your time and welcome questions.
Thank you. Next, Dwayne Kratt, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. And Delegate Ebersol, thank you for the the plug. We love being in Baltimore County, and appreciate being here today, and follow up on a couple of the comments, not only that the delegate made, but the representative from Frederick. This is all about tax fairness. Right now, the tax on our products that are the same ABV virtually is 17 times higher. This bill will still give the beer tax rate a lower advantage, but it will create a fairer, more equitable market. Our products, our RTD products, range from 3.6% ABV to 9% ABV. It is true there's some that are 12 to 13%. These products compete against the seltzers. And it's an important point that I make as I'll get into a little bit about revenue. The revenue figure, I think, estimated that whatever is sold in these will be taken away from spirits rate. That's not what's going to happen. These will compete for that cold box against other beer products that will still have a 4 times advantage in taxes, but it will be fair. The other point that I'll make is this is not an outrageous request. 23 states have similar lower tax rates for these types of products, including nearby Delaware, Virginia, some of the big states like New York, Michigan, Ohio, Florida. And my final point is, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, with the questions. Alcohol is alcohol. Any other kind of conversation about history or manufacturing or COGS is just a smokescreen. Alcohol is alcohol. A 5% wine-based product, a 5% beer product, a 5% spirit product is the same amount of alcohol. That's it. And I'm happy to take questions.
Next, Hannah Gargiola, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. Hannah Gargiola with Compass Government Relations here representing the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. You have our written testimony, so I will be very brief. We're here for a favorable committee report on House Bill 867. So as you know, House Bill 867 would set the state excise tax rate for low alcohol spirits-based ready-to-drink products at 40 cents a gallon. And today, Marylanders, your constituents, pay 17 times as much on a 12-ounce can of spirits-based ready-to-drink products as compared to a malt-based ready-to-drink product. So this is despite them being the exact same alcohol per volume. And then just really quickly to touch on the economic side, and I think the woman who represents 10th Ward Distillery did a good job sort of underscoring this, but the analysis that the Distilled Spirits Council has done predicts that Maryland will receive more than $1.8 million in new tax revenue from this category of drinks that Delegate Ebersol was saying are becoming more and more popular. So we kind of think that that should be factored into the economic analysis done in the fiscal note, which it was not. And the overall spirits industry contributes $2.3 billion to in economic activity to Maryland's economy. So just all things for you all to consider as you debate this bill, just that House Bill 867 would continue the growth of this industry and the thousands of jobs that it supports. So we urge a favorable committee report and we'll be around for questions. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now there are several people signed up to testify unfavorably. First, Terry Bernay, please, for 2 minutes. Hopefully I pronounced your name right.
Good morning, Madam Chair. It's Terry Byrne. Thank you. With Wine Institute, we're the Trade Association of California Wineries, and we're responsible for about 80% of domestic wine production. We are here to speak against this legislation, as we have done in states across the country. As the sponsor noted, wineries and breweries and distilleries have been blurring the lines between these products by the introduction of hundreds of new products, and all types of entities are producing them. So you've got wine-based products, you've got spirits-based product, and you've got malt-based products, and they're all being sold as ready-to-drink cocktails. Since the end of Prohibition, the federal government and most states still have controlled and taxed wine, beer, and spirits based on two factors. The first is the license of the producer and the raw material that's used to make it. You've got wineries that are fermenting grapes and breweries that are brewing grains and distillers that are distilling other natural products. The second factor is the ABV, the alcohol by volume of the finished product. And the federal government continues to regulate the producers, the formulas, the labeling, and the containers of all types of alcohol. And it continues to charge a federal excise tax rate that's based on both of these factors, not just the ABV. The Maryland bills propose to drop the tax rate on these spirits-based RTDs by 73%, based entirely on the ABV. A broader discussion about the longstanding tax policy in Maryland needs to occur before changing the tax on these very popular products. The trade suggests that these RTD products have increased in sales volume by 53% over the last year. So they're not struggling for market share, trust me. This change would further confuse consumers who are trying to figure out what products have alcohol in them and what don't anyway, as the RTDs would definitely contain spirits. The RTDs at issue here would contain spirits, but continue to be marketed as cocktails and taxed at lower rates. And note in the definition of what Maryland might call ready-to-drink cocktails, it requires spirits and a non-alcoholic beverage, but it may contain wine. It's not required to contain wine, it just may contain wine.
Wrap up your testimony. Can you wrap up your testimony, please?
Yes, ma'am. If the legislature wishes to reduce the tax on alcohol, it might do it equally by eliminating the current 9% alcohol retail surcharge on all off-premise alcohol sales. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. Next, Remy Eck, please, for 2 minutes. Who I did not see on here, but I will call one more time. Remy Eck for 2 minutes. Okay, the last individual, Jim McGreevy, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jim McGreevy, and I'm the president and CEO of the Beer Institute, a national trade association representing beer brewers and suppliers to the industry. On behalf of the more than 2 million Americans, America's beer industry supports across the country, including 31,000 in the state of Maryland, I'm pleased to present testimony on this bill. Beer opposes HB 867, a proposal to reduce the alcoholic beverage tax rate on canned cocktails made with hard liquor. This proposal lowers the hard liquor-based excise tax rate in Maryland by 73% and will result in a loss to the state treasury of more than $21 million over the next 5 years. The fiscal impact statement published ahead of today's hearing assumes a decrease in state revenues from hard liquor cocktails of approximately 5% annually, thus implying an expected growth rate of these cocktails to be only 5% per year. This is extremely unlikely to be the case, as the volume growth rate of spirits-based canned cocktails in 2021 was over 100% nationwide, according to Nielsen IQ. It would be almost unprecedented for the rate to slow from over 100% in 2021 to just 5% in 2023. House Bill 867 sends the wrong message by downplaying the risks of hard liquor. The beer industry has spent decades and invested billions of dollars on responsible drinking campaigns and other initiatives to ensure consumers enjoy beer safely and responsibly. The liquor industry in many ways has not done that. I urge the committee to consider the ramifications of this proposal and to give careful consideration when deliberating such a major change to the long-held public policy precedent in Maryland and beyond. Given the explosive growth trajectory of these hard liquor cocktails, a reduction in the tax rates currently assessed on these products would result in a windfall both for liquor manufacturers and would jeopardize state revenues. Thanks for your time and attention. Happy to stand for questions.
There are several questions. We'll start with Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd kind of, I guess, one question, just so I think I understand this, but for Delegate Ebersol, and then one question maybe for, I think Mr. McGreevy just testified. So this effectively through all of the machinations and the calculations and the math that Delegate Ebersol loves so much and is so dear to his heart, we're reducing the taxes on this category of RTD cocktails, ready to drink cocktails, to the same tax rate as wine, but it's still higher than the tax rate for normal beer products. Is that a fair way to say it, Delegate
Perfectly
Ebersol?
accurate. Perfectly accurate.
Okay. And then the second question that I had, and maybe Mr. McGreevy, you would talk about a $21 million fiscal loss. I'm a big believer in cutting taxes, so the fiscal loss probably doesn't bother me as much as what it may bother some members. And I see that in the testimony that's been offered from a variety of the brewers and their entities. And it's very different than our fiscal note, which only talks about a few $1 million decrease. What's the justification for that? Is it what you just said, that you think the fiscal note people are not properly valuing in the growth of the industry or the size of the industry and how much we would be losing by reducing the taxes? Or is there some other calculation, the difference between 2 or 3 million that the DLS people come up with and the 21 million that your organizations come up with?
Yeah, thank you, Representative, for the question. I think the fiscal note even notes that it's lacking in certain data sources. So we think the fiscal note is flawed. Certainly, we see the liquor industry indicating that the state would make more money from these products. We just don't see how that's possible. I think this all goes back to the longstanding policy, as the representative of the Wine Institute stated, the longstanding policy that alcohol tax rates are based on the beverage type plus the ABV. The liquor industry is interested in changing that equation and just basing alcohol excise taxes off of ABV. We think that's wrong-headed policy. This is a policy that the liquor industry has pursued for over 40 years unsuccessfully in nearly all cases. We think that you and the Ways and Means Committee legislators in Maryland should be focused on the equation of beverage type plus ABV equals the appropriate alcohol excise tax.
And I just read
the proposal would change that.
A brief follow-up. I just read this again, your written submission, or I don't know if it's your written submission, but the submission from Anheuser-Busch and the Wholesalers Association and Molson Coors, other entities. That $21 million, that's over 5 years. So your calculation is basically, it would be around $4 million, $4 million in change would be the average net loss, which I guess really isn't that different from the DLS estimate. Their estimate is it would be around $3 million a year on average. They're estimating from 2.8 to up to 3.4 over the 5-year term. So if I'm doing my math right, and I went to law school to avoid math, as Delegate Ebersol knows, but seems like pretty simple math. Their estimate would be around 15 million, and your industry's estimate is around 21 million over 5 years, over an attenuated period of time. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. It's certainly a policy question for this committee and for the legislature to decide whether that's an appropriate loss of revenue for products that are, as the representative of the Wine Institute said, really flying off the shelves at this point. This is an evolving sector of our industry. We don't know where it's going. To change the policy on taxation in these early days of the marketplace seems premature in our view.
They're too sweet for me, so I don't know a whole heck of a lot about them or their market dominance, but I appreciate your answers. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
And if I may, one of the advocates I think would like probably to weigh in on the fiscal note as well. If this is a good time for that. If it's not, we can wait for the rest of the questions. But I believe Dwayne Kratt would address that from his perspective.
Well,
Okay,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me get through the questions. Delegate Lukey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the bill. This is an interesting question. But Ms. Byrne, let me ask you a question. Wine coolers generally run around like 4 to 6% ABV. Are they taxed as wine or or on a beer level?
They're taxed at the wine rate because they're made by wineries generally.
Why wouldn't it make more sense to tax them at a lower level because they're a lower ABV?
Well, if you only looked at ABV as the one factor upon which to determine the taxes, you would do that. But historically, that's not the way it's been done at the federal level or at the state levels. You've got wineries and distilleries and breweries that are licensed by the federal government that are treated and taxed, or treated quite differently at that level, way behind the product. The entity itself and the products that they use to produce it go into the decision.
Sure. And I think that gets at the crux of the question for me, which is raised by your response here and by Mr. McGreevy's comments earlier. I don't understand the argument for why products should be taxed differently based on the beverage type when the ingredient that matters is the ethanol, right? And you see a range of wines, some as low as 4% in wine coolers and then much higher. And you see a range of beers, frankly. I mean, I've seen beers that they're not very good, but that run like 20% ABV. And so wouldn't it make more sense then to simply tax based on the ethanol content, or put another way, for what reason should we tax differently based on the production method, which is essentially what we do right now?
Madam Chair, if I may, that's a great question. It's not purely based on the ethanol. For spirits, it is. So, and you can industrially manufacture ethanol, and you can turn the tap and make whatever product you wish, depending on how you refine it after that fact. But wineries and breweries are using agricultural products to produce what they make. So you've got all of the backstory, if you will, in the production of wine and beer that goes into the historical treatment of the products, or the tax treatment of those products. You've got agricultural products, you've got unpredictable weather and other things that influence the production and the availability of those products. And that's all been factored in since Prohibition, really.
Sure, but sorry, Delegate.
I can answer the question a little bit for you too, but go ahead.
Well, let me keep asking, and I'll jump. I got some hard questions for you too, Delegate Everson.
I'm looking forward to that.
If the argument is agricultural products, I mean, I assume distillers are making their products out of agricultural products, not out of rocks, right?
You'll have to ask them how they make their products.
Okay.
I can tell you how to make wine, sir.
Yeah, no,
it's not easy, and it's quite expensive, and there are land use issues and other things that are factored into the historical treatment of these different types of producers.
I get that. I just, I don't necessarily think the rules that were made, 90 years ago are necessarily the rules we should be operating under now. And I get the competitive issues within the industry. I get all of those factors. Mr. McGreevy, I don't know if you had comments to that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate. I don't think that this is a policy that was made 90 years ago. I think the U.S. Congress, as recently as December of 2020, reasserted and reaffirmed the differentiated tax policy, the differentiated tax rates for spirits, wine, and beer in its passage of the Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act. One of the more popular bills in the United States Congress in that session of Congress lowered the excise tax rates for beer, wine, and spirits, but did it in a way that respected the differentiation between those tax rates for spirits, wine, and beer. So this is a long-standing policy, but it's also something that at least another legislative body less than 2 years ago reaffirmed in the correctness of its policy. You all are dealing here with a running debate in the alcohol industry for the last 40 years. Mr. Kratz says alcohol is alcohol. We just don't believe that alcohol is alcohol. The average ABV for beer in 2020 was 4.62%. The average ABV for liquor products in 2020 was closer to 40%, as Delegate Ebersol said. When making excise tax policy, we think you have to take into account how the products are made, how they are distributed, and how they are consumed. That's why the policy of beverage type plus ABV, we think, is the right policy for alcohol excise taxes.
If I may, Delegate, there is precedent. It's not absolute, but there is precedent for using alcohol by volume to help determine the tax. In fact, the spirit, Malik quoted as $1.50 per gallon, actually begins to increase once an alcohol goes above 100 proof. Each point is another half of a percentage of alcohol by volume. And the tax rate, the excise tax rate on that increases with each point on proof. So it's not absolute, but it has been used as a determiner. So I want to just point that out.
Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Luke, okay. Delegate Feldmark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have lots of questions. I'll just ask a few. I guess to get to kind of back to the fiscal note, I would like to better understand from the perspective of the distillers, whether the representative from 10th Ward or Mr. Pratt, this, I understand or at least the assumptions that were explicit in the fiscal note. But given sort of where this product sits in the market, what do you think is it appropriate to look at this growing as sort of an equal to or taking away from distilled spirits? I mean, it seems like as a consumer product, it's going to be much more closely aligned with wine or beer. So can you speak to that a little bit?
And the discus actually has some figures. My sense of that fiscal note was they said basically for everything that grows and an RTD takes away from full strength spirits, and I'm going to do that quotes, full strength spirits generally at 40% ABV. We don't believe that that's an accurate analysis. In fact, we believe, and it's what we're seeing, it's taking away from the seltzers of the world. I'm not going to mention any brands. It's taken away from the seltzers of the world. So when that happens, this product's still going to be a higher excise tax. The sales tax is still going to be there. As Monica says, these go between $12 and $16 a 4-pack. So there's going to be increased sales tax as there's a substitution between these products and the beer or sugar-based products. I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be a huge number. I think the discus number was pretty modest, but we do not believe it's going to be a lessening of the revenues. So I'll answer that one specific question, and hopefully I'll get a chance to address some of the other comments that were made.
Sure. So then another question, and I guess this is sort of along the same lines that Delegate Lukey was asking, we're talking about averages or not. I don't want Delegate Ebersol to get concerned about my misuse of the term average. We're talking about some typical ABV values, right?
My head's exploding right now.
Sorry about that. But there's a lot of overlap, right? I mean, take Aperol, right? A very low ABV liqueur, but it's a distilled spirit. It's 11%. I mean, Guinness has beer on your tap list right now that's at 12, right? So why are we still, shouldn't that be taken into account somehow? And, we've got beers that are 18, 20% ABV. You're talking twice the ABV of a spirit. So how do you reconcile that? Anyone from either side can try to help me reconcile that?
I can speak to that.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. So I think historically, from the spirits perspective, you're not going to see as much of a fight when somebody's selling a 750 milliliter bottle versus an 8-ounce can, which is why I think for the most part, people have been okay with being taxed at that level. I can say I'm one of those distilleries that does pay based on ABV as it goes higher. I produce an absinthe that's traditionally 140 proof, that is usually consumed diluted with water in a lower amount of ounces. So we pay that extra tax. But I think because of the growth of the RTD market and because of the amount of time and money and effort that goes into our production for a product like that, we're spending more overhead, more time to create this because I'm fermenting something and then I'm distilling it and then I'm blending it into a cocktail and then I'm canning it, where a brewery or a winery is just fermenting it and putting it in a can. So I already have those extra expenses, which is where I kind of see the fight more. And then to clarify slightly on a previous conversation, we do source everything locally. We support a local farmer by ordering thousands of pounds of grain a week. And I've got 16 local staff members. We're working our butts off to, you know, produce these 5% ABV cans that are just, in my mind, I guess I would say more expensive and more time consuming for a higher excise tax rate.
Thank you. And so I guess my my last question, at least for now, I can follow up offline, but you know, in the sort of alcohol is alcohol line of questioning, you know, I guess I think maybe, I'm not sure, it may have been Mr. McGreevy made reference to sort of the risks of hard liquor. And I guess, you know, I understand differences in production, but when we talk about the risks of alcohol consumption, aren't we really talking about the quantity of alcohol consumed?
Yeah, an 11% ABV beer is going to get you drunker than a 5% ABV cocktail. And that's how it is. That's why it's labeled that way, so that consumers are aware of how much they're consuming.
Okay.
Monica jumped in. You know, it's a great question. And first and foremost, you know, a lot of times Mr. McGreevy and I work together on programs, and so does Terry. I mean, we often, probably more times than not, work together on things, and they're friends. And I think Mr. McGreevy was correct in saying this is something where there's a disagreement. Fact of the matter, 90 years ago, there wasn't an RTD. There was only the 40% ABV product for the most part. The discussion about costs and what have you, I'm not even sure that's relevant, but hey, guess what? Brown liquor gets aged 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. So there's a lot of cost there too. And to address specifically their question, I don't think the beer industry has a monopoly on responsibility programming. I'll just say, I'm not sure that was appropriate. That's not something we fight about. We all work very hard as an industry. We all support tough drunk driving laws. We all support programs for moderate consumption. So to suggest that one's more dangerous than the other, especially when we're talking about these products that are the same virtual ABV, I'll just call that one out.
Well, I'll certainly, I mean, if I have the opportunity to respond, Delegate, I'll certainly say I do respect Dwayne and have worked with him and others in the liquor industry for a long time now. Sometimes we often do work on issues together. But I will say the liquor industry has sought the equalization of tax rates between beer and spirits and wine and spirits for 40 years. This was before they had the lower ABV RTDs, when they thought that, when they suggested to legislators that tax rates should be lowered for their 40% products or their 35% products versus beer's 4.6% products. So that was the context of what I was talking about when I said that, when I talked about responsibility. The policy of the liquor industry has been to seek equalized taxes with wine and beer for a long time, really in the face of years of having products that are higher in ABV. Our basic view of the current RTDs that are on the market, spirits-based RTDs on the market, is that these products are made as liquor products, they're marketed as liquor products, and they should be taxed as liquor products. Certainly, this legislature is going to take up this issue and is doing it now in committee. We see this happening in 10 other states or 15 other states around the country, the same exact debate. We've been having it, as I said, in the alcohol industry for 40 years. But I think it's important to note when the Congress of the United States had the opportunity to equalize tax rates between beer, wine, and spirits, they declined to do that and kept the policy of differentiation in place. And we think that's what you should do in Maryland.
Delegate, if I may.
Nope. Delegate Feldmark, are you done with your questions?
I'm good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Our ECN colleagues have some questions. So Delegate Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple quick questions, and probably Delegate Ebersol may know this or may not. I'm looking through the fiscal note. What was the total amount in revenues just from RTD? Do we have that available to us in terms of what RTD was brought in last year or prior years?
I don't know that
seriously
figure. I
doubt
didn't
it
see it in the
differentiates.
fiscal note.
It probably just is all
What
spirit
was it?
volume.
Sorry. Delegate Ebersol, you said you don't know it?
No, I don't. I didn't separate out the various kinds and what they did.
Okay, but I'd be curious to know about that one. That helps because, going back to when I was on this committee. So I'm trying to figure out, it's a growing market, and I'll ask this to say Mr. Kratt. So this is something that it's passed on to the consumer, right? So whatever the tax is, the consumer is bearing the brunt. You just pass it on to the consumer, correct?
It certainly passes on to the consumer. It goes to how we may invest in the product. There's a lot of things that go into that. To answer your question, I seriously doubt there's a segmentation of whether a product's an RTD or a 40% ABV product from the state. So I doubt that data exists.
I don't think we need to know that, because obviously anytime you're talking about lowering, from 150 down to 46, easy. Sorry. From 150 down to 40 cents, then the first thing I think is, okay, how is the state going to recoup this money that we're going to lose? So when I see the fiscal note there, and I say it's showing me one thing saying, hey, you're probably going to lose this and then some, I haven't heard a way in which we said, oh, you'll gain that back.
Well, you'll gain that back because this product that's going to be taxed, if the legislature chooses to move forward, this product that's going to still be taxed more than 4 times the rate of beer, substitutes, meaning there will be this product, the spirit-based RTD, that will take share from the beer or sugar-based seltzer. So taking share at a higher excise tax and a higher sales tax, because the 4-pack is going to be more expensive than the 6-pack. Truly.
I got
I said a brand. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I heard that one earlier. I was gotcha. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Delegate Arentz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be in front of you all. I guess as I've listened to this whole bill, I've heard a lot of things about the tax being lowered, and I'm all for that. And I also understand market shares, and I also understand that only X amount of this liquid of any kind is going to be consumed by people at any one time. I haven't heard a whole lot that once this tax, if it were to be lowered, what does this do to the consumers, and what will this do to the pricing? We heard a little bit about a 25% or 25-cent profit margin. How does this end up affecting the consumer of these products? And will we see a major price reduction in these drinks?
I can tell you from my perspective, we'd be able to reduce our prices, which would put us at a more competitive rate to other items like seltzers and beers and wines. I also think you'll see more RTD production in the state from those that have not wanted to do it because of that excise tax, and potentially more coming in from out of state as well, who haven't thought to pick up Maryland as a market because of those extra expenses.
Is there anything we can do to ensure that reduction? You said it might be. We probably.
Sure. I'm not sure what other manufacturers would be considering, but I can only speak from my perspective.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions for Delegate Ebersol or any of the witnesses? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 867, and that concludes the hearings for the Ways and Means Committee today. If the Ways and Means Committee members could just hang on while we go offline here and everyone else exits.